Hi, and welcome to this presentation on governance of datafication. As Emilio Fluebom and his co-authors state, recent developments have increased the awareness that the current approach of governments and corporations to the governance of the Internet and the adjacent technological spaces raise a host of ethical, political, legal, and rights-related issues. This begs the question, who governs datafication? Already here, we need to make a concretization. We cannot ask this question in the singular, but should rather ask about the multiple stakeholders of datafication governance, including public, private, and public-private stakeholders, individuals, communities, and civil society, as well as humans, non-humans, and human non-humans. We also need to talk about the landscape of datafication and the governance mechanisms that it includes. And one place we might want to look towards is the Internet's governance landscape. So one way to approach the question of governance of datafication could be to situate it within the larger question of Internet governance. This diagram shows the organizations and communities that have organically evolved to guide the operation and development of the technologies and infrastructure that comprise the global Internet. These organizations work with different and sometimes common values and have been developed by multiple stakeholders, public as well as private, under a wide variety of conditions and ideologies. And as you can see, these stakeholders include the public and private sector, academia, and civil society, to mention just a few. Internet governance also allows us to ask about the many layers of governance of datafication, from the physical infrastructures, the logical resources, and the application and content layers and legal layers of governance. One example of a physical infrastructure could, for instance, be the submarine cables that transport several exabytes of information a day and that allows datafication to take place. What we see here is a map of the Internet as cables. Hundreds of thousands of miles of cables that crisscross countries, and more are laid along the seafloor to connect islands and continents. Hundreds of submarine cables, the deep sea variant only as thick as a garden hose, underpin the modern Internet and thus also most datafication processes. And many of these are bundles of hair-thin fiber optics that carry data at the speed of light. So these cables, as you can see, range from shorter connections to the 12,000-mile Asia-American Gateway, which links California to Singapore, Hong Kong, and other places in Asia. And these major cables serve a staggering number of peoples and computational processes. The question of Internet governance also leads us to thinking about the World Wide Web. That is, the web that allows us to view and share information over the Internet. That information, be it text, music, photos, or videos, is written on web pages served up by a web browser. And it's many of these places that serve the foundation for datafication processes, including data collection. A new and emerging interest are the platforms that operate on the Internet and the web. Ultimately, the platform web is made up of privately owned public spaces, largely governed by commercial incentives of private actors. Platforms then operate something like shopping malls rather than town squares, public to an extent, but ultimately managed according to private interests. Examples of such platforms could be Google, or Facebook, as we see here, Twitter, and Amazon, and they now serve billions of users around the world and increasingly perform core functions in our society. For many users, particularly those in emerging economies, these companies often operate as the primary filtering point for information on the internet. And the private gains are clear to see. Google, Facebook, and Amazon are among the most profitable companies in history. But as we discuss in this class as well, despite the many benefits offered by platforms, there are also many associated costs. Platforms also introduce new forms of governance, such as tiered governance, where platforms offer different users different sets of rules, different material resources and opportunities, and different procedural protections. And finally, they introduce new governance mechanisms such as algorithms. As Christian Ketzenbacher and Lena Ulbricht note, the concept of algorithmic governance encapsulates a wide range of socio-technical practices that order and regulate the social in specific ways, ranging from predictive policing to the management of labor and content moderation. Algorithmic governance thus has many faces, as ordering, regulating, and behavior modification mechanisms, as forms of management, of optimization, and of participation. And then there is, of course, the important topic of data governance. While major attention is often given to the dominant model of corporate platforms collecting and economically exploiting massive amounts of personal data, other actors such as small businesses, public bodies, and civic society also take part in data governance. Indeed, many actors from public sector, academia, businesses, civic society, as well as activists and social entrepreneurs, are seeking alternatives to dominant data governance models. Examples of such new governance models are data sharing pools, data cooperatives, public data trusts, and personal data sovereignty. Some of these are also enabled by new legislative initiatives, such as the GDPR. As this presentation has shown then, the question about who, what, and how datafication is governed also raises questions about governance layers, stakeholders, and infrastructures. It shows that questions such as platform, algorithmic, and data governance are becoming increasingly urgent topics to discuss. And it shows that the wide variety in governance models and stakeholders highlight the role that both corporate and civic society, as well as public bodies, play in centralizing and exploiting, as well as democratizing data governance and redistributing value produced through data.